We're back at AJ's again and looking at a steering rack and pinion gearbox off of a Wildcat 1000 2014 Wildcat X. We've taken this gearbox apart just to really see what makes it tick. What we've got is the upper case half, and as you can see there's a bearing in the back, what the steering shaft rides through. And if you look deep enough, you can see where the bushings on the worm gear, which is on the bottom, slides through the aluminum housing. We've got the steering gearbox cover, and in this cover it takes a brass bushing right here for the steering gear to ride on. The steering gear shaft fits in that bushing and rotates. Okay, so this thing's sealed up together, but it's actually really not a sealed unit. This part right here is a steel plate encapsulated with rubber, and if you'll see, it's square grooved on one side, round grooved on the other. So if we was assembling this gearbox, starting from this half, the shaft would be through the bearing, sticking through the other side. You would have the worm gear put in the bottom. But on the front half, a lot of people think this is a sealed unit. It is not a sealed unit. This one particular piece rides right there. I'm going to set that gear back out. This piece of rubber that's wrapped around this one piece of metal, it slides when you steer left to right. On this particular part is a stainless steel thin shim. That stainless steel shim fits right there. Then on the back of that, if you look close, you can see the impression of the teeth that's on the gear that butts up against this. But there's a thin, flimsy piece of rubber that lays on this part. So that's basically what that looks like mating to the gear if this piece was turned over onto that piece. So again, here is your gear, your slide gear or worm gear that travels left to right, right to left. Turn it over. If you look on the back side, it's machined out. It's machined out for this pin. This pin is what your steering slider bolts to. That pin drops through this, goes down in that hole, and then that is what sticks to your gearbox. So I'm kind of assembling this thing in reverse. And it also has, if you look on this end, here's a bushing. Here's another bushing that's off. So this bushing is here. So we have a bushing on each end that rides in that gearbox. And you can see how the bushings are grinding into the back of the aluminum case. There's also spring-loaded brass button, which is right here. Picking this piece up, if you look, there's an Allen screw right there in the gearbox. That does not adjust. That's just an Allen screw that comes out, and it's to access and to replace, I presume, this brass bushing. So with that being said, the little spring goes down in the hole. The brass bushing goes down in the hole. And that is what holds a little pressure against your worm gear. Although it's not all the way in, the spring has to go up in the brass bushing, like so. And then once it's put into the gearbox, now you can see how much farther down it is. So basically, when this is together, We'll set this gear back off and all these pieces. That gear sits right there in the bottom. And what's happened to this particular gearbox? The teeth got stripped off on one end. And if you look how they rounded off, what causes that? If you'll notice, there's a torque screw in the end here. Well, there's not one here. What happened to this particular box, where the bushing goes on the end, you can see how it's kind of egg-shaped. That screw loosened when it was steered all the way to one side, bent the screw, broke it, it fell out into the gearbox, causing the bushing to drop off. So this is actually what it should look like with the bushing on each end. So like I say, what happened to this particular model, it slid steering this way. The screw was backed out, it hit the end of the gearbox. The screw broke, when it come back, the gear dropped down. When it got over to this side, there was no bushing and it stripped the teeth off. It's sad to say that this particular unit is put together with nothing more than scrap metal parts. It's not even a good design. But again, it's all we have as far as a gearbox. We'll try and set the phone down and see if I can assemble this thing just a little bit as to how it's supposed to go together. Now, I've got the phone propped up, maybe it'll stay there. Anyways, what we've got to do is take this back out, and this is the actual seal cover for the bearing. If you look, that bearing right there is froze. That center will not turn. This particular gearbox has got 1,400 miles on it. So again, I'm going to assemble it just about the way it goes together. You've got your bushing that holds your gear. Of course, the seal would go in. I'm going to leave that out for right now. This will drop in. That's your gear. So now you can see how this is done. We've got the pin that goes through. We've got the bushing that should be bolted onto the end. And then this fits in to your gear. So now when you steer it, this steers left to right, right to left. And you can see how that bushing, like I say, the screw's missing, the threads are stripped in the end of that gear. If that bushing had stayed on this, that gear would have not stripped. So we're going to center this back up. You've got your rubber gasket that goes over the pin, lays against the steel gear. You've got your shim. If you look, you can see the teeth print on the shim. And this is all just for spacing. So you've got your shim. Then you've got your cover, and of course your brass bushing. This cover seals on this to the stainless steel. It's also in here. So basically, the round is sealing on that. And then when we put this together, if the bushing don't fall out, that's your gearbox. So again, as you steer it, it steers left to right. So this supposedly sealed here, and then around this oval racetrack looking piece here steels to that steel. But the bushings that's inside is floppy, loose, coming apart. So it's going to let this gear move. So how can it seal tight to the seals? It can't. So again, I just do not believe from the factory that this is even a sealed unit. As you can see, it steers left to right. But keep in mind, 1,400 miles, the bearing's locked up. This shaft is turning good, but the bearing's not turning. The bearing's locked up. So once you take all your bolts out of the bottom, it does have a gasket on it that's approximately about 42 thousandths thick. And that gasket serves as a shim. So taking this back off, there's your plate. Here's your bushing for the shaft gear. Here's your seal plate that goes in the bottom. Here's your stainless steel that seals against the seal plate. We're going to pull the gear back out, and you can see that the bushing's already come away right here on the corner. That bushing should be here on the end. And these serves as a stop too. They bump each end of the gearbox. When that comes off and that screw backs out, it don't turn all the way. Then when that gear drops down, we're only teeter-tottering on the bottom. Take this gasket back off. There's one adjustment pin bushing in the bottom, spring-loaded, holding that gear up. I'm going to look into something a little different. You can see how that gear rocks now without that bushing on there. Get it all the way over to one side, and that gear drops down. The bushing's bad, it's going to strip the teeth off. It's going to happen to every one of them. Anyways, just wanted to give you a rundown of the gearbox, what it looks like on the inside, what you're fighting against. And there again, there's the gear, there's the pin. You can look at the gear, how it's machined out in the back to accept it. Drilled on each end, has an Allen screw. You got your brass button in the bottom, which your brass button is to slide on the bottom of the gear. Keep that gear tight. One brass button, one spring. Not a very healthy spring, not a very big spring, but that's what we're relying on. And then you've got your drive shaft, your drive gear. That's actually turning just on the inside of the bearing on this particular part. Because again, that bearing is froze up and won't turn. So we're going to dig into this a little bit more, see what we can come up with, and who knows, we might even just try to rebuild one and just do it our way. Anyways, I just want to give you some ideas on the gearbox on your 1000. Thanks.